The studio buzzed with its usual Friday afternoon energy as Ellen moved through the audience during her favorite Getting to Know You segment. But when 26-year-old Sarah Williams slowly stood up from her seat in the fourth row, her hands trembling and tears already forming in her eyes, everything was about to change. It was supposed to be another heartwarming edition of audience interactions at Warner Brothers Studio. The Ellen DeGeneres show was featuring stories from everyday people, with Ellen wearing her signature blue suit, creating those magical moments of connection that made her show a beacon of hope for millions. Sarah Williams sat quietly in the fourth row, wearing a simple white blouse and jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that revealed the exhaustion in her brown eyes. She was a young woman who carried herself with the weight of someone much older, her shoulders bearing burdens that 3 years of family rejection had placed there. At 26, she had learned that love sometimes comes with conditions that break your heart. During the commercial break, Ellen had noticed Sarah's intense focus and the way she seemed to be gathering courage for something important. There was a sadness about this young woman that stood out even in a crowd of happy faces eager to share their stories. Sarah had driven 6 hours from Sacramento, using money she'd saved from her job as a nurse to make this trip for reasons she could barely articulate. The audience interaction segment had been filled with the usual Ellen magic, stories of new businesses, family reunions, and dreams coming true. Ellen was in her element, moving between audience members with her natural warmth and gift for making everyone feel heard. She had just finished celebrating a grandmother's 100th birthday when Sarah raised her hand. "Ellen," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying across the studio, "may I tell you about my family?" Ellen immediately sensed the gravity in Sarah's tone and the way the audience members around her leaned in with concern. "Of course, honey. What's going on with your family?" Sarah stood up slowly, her legs unsteady, as she prepared to share something that had been eating at her soul for 3 years. "3 years ago, my father stopped speaking to me," she said, her voice growing stronger, but filled with pain. "He didn't come to my wedding, and he's never met his grandson." The casual energy in the studio shifted as everyone realized they were about to hear something heartbreaking. Ellen walked closer to Sarah, her entertainer instincts immediately recognizing that this was no ordinary family story. "Sarah, why did your father stop speaking to you?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she held her head high with a dignity that spoke of years of defending her choices. "Because I married a black man," she said simply, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. "My father said he raised me better than that, and if I went through with the wedding, he never wanted to see me again." Ellen stopped walking entirely, her hand going to her heart, as the full weight of what Sarah was sharing hit her. The studio fell into complete silence, 300 people processing the ugly reality of racism that still divided families in modern America. "Oh, Sarah," Ellen whispered, her voice carrying a pain that reached every corner of the studio. "My husband Marcus is the kindest, most wonderful man I've ever known," Sarah continued, tears now flowing freely. "He's a pediatric doctor who saves children's lives every day. But my father can't see past the color of his skin." Ellen's expression grew increasingly pained as she understood the depth of this family's brokenness. Ellen immediately signaled to her production team to give this conversation the space it needed. "Sarah, tell me about your husband, about your life together," Ellen said gently, moving closer until she was standing directly in front of the young woman. "Help us understand what your father is missing." Sarah's face lit up despite her tears as she began talking about Marcus. "We met in nursing school 5 years ago," she said, her voice filled with love. "He was the smartest person in our class, but also the most compassionate. He used to stay after clinical rotations to read to the pediatric patients who didn't have visitors." "And you have a child together?" Ellen asked, her voice soft with understanding. Sarah nodded, pulling out her phone to show Ellen a photo of a beautiful toddler with mixed features and the brightest smile. "This is David. He's 2 years old, and he's never met his grandfather." Ellen looked at the photo and her heart broke a little more. "He's beautiful, Sarah. Absolutely beautiful." She turned to address the studio audience, many of whom were now crying openly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about a family torn apart by prejudice, and a grandfather who's missing out on knowing this precious child. The worst part," Sarah continued, her voice breaking, "is that I know my father is a good man deep down. He taught me to be kind, to help others, to stand up for what's right, but somehow he can't apply those lessons to his own family. Ellen felt tears forming in her own eyes as she recognized the complexity of love and disappointment in Sarah's voice. Ellen made a decision that would define this moment forever. "Sarah, where does your father live? Is he still in Sacramento?" When Sarah nodded, Ellen pulled out her phone. "I'm going to call him right now. Some conversations can't wait another day." "Ellen." "No," Sarah said quickly, panic in her voice. "He won't want to talk to you about this. He's very set in his ways." But Ellen was already dialing the number Sarah had reluctantly provided, understanding that some healing required intervention. The phone rang twice before a gruff male voice answered. "Hello?" Ellen put the call on speaker so the entire studio could hear. "Is this Robert Williams?" she asked. "Yes, who is this?" came the suspicious reply. "Mr. Williams, this is Ellen DeGeneres, and I'm here with your daughter Sarah." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Robert's voice came through, strained and uncomfortable. "I don't have a daughter," he said, the words cutting through the studio like a knife. Sarah visibly flinched, and Ellen's expression hardened with determination. "Mr. Williams, yes you do," Ellen said firmly. "You have a beautiful daughter who loves you, and you have a 2-year-old grandson named David who looks just like you. And right now, your daughter is sitting in my studio crying because she misses her father." More silence followed, then the sound of Robert clearing his throat. "Ellen, I don't know why Sarah came to you, but our family business is our own," Robert said, his voice defensive, but with an undertone Ellen recognized as pain. "Some choices have consequences, and she made her choice." Ellen's response was immediate and powerful. "Mr. Williams, I need to tell you something," Ellen said, her voice carrying across the studio with absolute authority. "In 3 minutes of talking to your daughter, I can see that you raised an incredible woman. She's compassionate, she's strong, and she married a doctor who saves children's lives. If you can't see that, then the problem isn't with her choices." The studio audience burst into spontaneous applause, but Ellen held up her hand for quiet. She wasn't finished. "Mr. Williams, I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. If something happened to Sarah tomorrow, would you regret the 3 years you've wasted being angry instead of being a father and grandfather?" Another long silence followed, and Sarah covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed by the confrontation she'd never expected. When Robert finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller, more vulnerable. "Ellen, you don't understand the world I grew up in, the things I was taught." "You're right, I don't understand," Ellen interrupted gently but firmly. "But I understand love and I understand family, and I understand that your daughter drove 6 hours to tell strangers on national television how much she misses her father. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of person you raised." Ellen paused, then continued with a gentleness that surprised everyone. "Mr. Williams, Sarah didn't come here to embarrass you or to make you look bad. She came here because she loves you, and she's hoping that somewhere in your heart you still love her too." The emotion in Ellen's voice was matched by the tears streaming down Sarah's face. "I do love her," Robert's voice came through the phone, broken and raw. "I've always loved her. But I was so angry, so disappointed. I thought if I cut her off, she'd come to her senses." And he couldn't finish the sentence, the futility of his logic becoming clear even to himself. Ellen sensed an opening and pressed gently forward. "Mr. Williams, I want you to know something. Your daughter is a nurse who dedicates her life to helping people heal. Your grandson is a beautiful, healthy, happy child who deserves to know his grandfather. And your son-in-law is saving children's lives every single day. If those aren't the kind of people you want in your family, then I don't understand what family means to you." The conversation was interrupted by Ellen's assistant approaching with an urgent note. Ellen read it quickly, and her expression changed to one of deep concern. "Mr. Williams, I need to ask you something personal. Are you feeling okay? Health-wise, I mean?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, and Sarah looked confused. "Why would you ask that?" Robert's voice was suddenly guarded. Ellen looked at the note again, then at Sarah. "Because I just received some information, and I need to know if you've been to a doctor recently." The studio held its breath as they sensed something significant was about to be revealed. "I? How did you?" Robert's voice trailed off, and Sarah stood up straighter, alarm written across her face. Dad, what's wrong? What is Ellen talking about? For the first time in 3 years, Sarah was speaking directly to her father, and the word Dad hung in the air between them. I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 2 weeks ago, Robert said finally, his voice barely audible through the phone. Stage 3. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months to a year. The studio erupted in gasps, and Sarah sank back into her chair as if she'd been physically struck. Dad, no. Sarah cried out, all pretense of estrangement forgotten in the face of this devastating news. Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me? Her voice was breaking with a grief that went far beyond their 3-year separation. Because I was ashamed, Robert admitted, his own voice now thick with tears. Because I realized that I might die having wasted 3 years being angry about something that doesn't matter. Because I was scared you wouldn't care. The raw honesty in his admission left the entire studio speechless. Ellen made another decision that would change everything. Mr. Williams, I'm sending a car for you right now. You're coming here today, and you're going to meet your grandson and have a conversation with your daughter that's 3 years overdue. She was already signaling to her production team to make the arrangements. Ellen, I don't know if I'm ready, Robert said, but there was hope in his voice for the first time. I said terrible things. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. Sarah was crying openly now, but she leaned toward the phone with determination. Dad, I don't care what you said, Sarah said through her tears. I care that you're sick and you're alone and you think I wouldn't care. I've been waiting for 3 years for you to come back to our family. Ellen watched this exchange with tears in her own eyes, understanding that she was witnessing a family beginning to heal. 2 hours later, Robert Williams walked into Ellen's studio, looking exactly like what he was, a man who had spent 3 years carrying the weight of his own stubbornness and was now facing his mortality. He was tall and thin, with graying hair and eyes that were unmistakably Sarah's, carrying himself with the careful movements of someone dealing with serious illness. The reunion between father and daughter was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah ran to Robert the moment he appeared, and their embrace was 3 years of missed birthdays, holidays, and ordinary moments condensed into one desperate hug. I'm sorry, Robert whispered into his daughter's hair. I'm so sorry, baby girl. But Ellen wasn't finished orchestrating this healing. Robert, there's someone else here who wants to meet you, she said gently. On cue, Marcus appeared carrying 2-year-old David, and the studio held its breath as 3 generations of the Williams family came face to face for the first time. Robert stared at his grandson for a long moment, taking in the child's mixed features, his bright eyes, and his confident smile. He looks like you did at that age, Robert said to Sarah, his voice filled with wonder. He has your eyes. David, with the fearlessness of a toddler, reached toward his grandfather, with curiosity rather than fear. Can I hold him? Robert asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Marcus, showing the grace that had won Sarah's heart, immediately placed David in his grandfather's arms. David, this is Grandpa, Marcus said simply, and Robert broke down completely. Ellen gave the family space for their reunion, but she wasn't done. Robert, I want you to know something about Marcus, she said. He's a pediatric oncologist. He spends his days helping children fight cancer. He's dedicated his life to saving kids who are dealing with what you're dealing with now. Robert looked at Marcus with new eyes, understanding for the first time that this man he'd rejected was someone who understood his current battle intimately. You help children with cancer? Robert asked, and Marcus nodded. Every day. And if you'll let me, I'd like to help you too. I know some excellent oncologists here in Los Angeles. Ellen announced that her foundation would cover all of Robert's treatment costs, and that she was arranging for him to see the best specialists available. Robert, you're going to fight this, and you're going to have your family by your side every step of the way, she said with a determination that had made her beloved by millions. The episode featuring the Williams family reunion became one of Ellen's most powerful and shared segments, not because of drama or spectacle, but because viewers witnessed the power of love to overcome even the deepest prejudices when faced with what really matters. Ellen received thousands of letters from families dealing with similar divisions, many inspired to reach out to estranged relatives. 6 months later, Robert's cancer treatment had been successful beyond all expectations. His oncologist, recommended by Marcus, attributed his recovery partly to what he called the healing power of family support and purpose. Robert had moved to be closer to Sarah and Marcus, becoming the involved grandfather he'd never allowed himself to be. Ellen established the Family Bridge Foundation, dedicated to helping families overcome divisions based on prejudice and misunderstanding. Robert became an unexpected spokesman for the foundation, sharing his story at conferences about the cost of hate and the healing power of love. His favorite part was always introducing people to his son-in-law, Dr. Marcus Williams, the man who saved my grandson's father and taught me what character really looks like. Sarah and Marcus's marriage grew stronger through the crisis, proving that love tested by adversity often emerges more beautiful than before. David grew up knowing all his grandparents, never understanding that there had been a time when his family was broken by something as meaningless as skin color. The lesson Robert taught Ellen and millions of viewers transcended race relations. It was about the futility of hate in the face of love, the power of crisis to reveal what truly matters, and the understanding that family isn't about perfection, but about choosing to show up for each other when it counts. Robert lived 4 more years, long enough to walk Sarah down the aisle when she and Marcus renewed their vows on their 5th anniversary, with David as their ring bearer. He spent those years not mourning the time lost to prejudice, but celebrating the time found through forgiveness, proving that healing can happen at any age when the heart is finally ready to choose love over fear. Ellen keeps a photo from that day on her desk, Robert holding David while Sarah and Marcus stand beside them, all of them laughing at something David had said. It reminds her that some of television's most important moments happen not when you plan them, but when you create space for families to remember that love is stronger than any force that tries to divide them. The Williams family story became a testament to the truth that prejudice is a luxury people can only afford until they're faced with what really matters. When Robert was confronted with his own mortality, the color of his son-in-law's skin became irrelevant compared to the love in his heart and the grandchild in his arms. Because that's what love looks like when it conquers fear. That's what family sounds like when it chooses healing over hate. And that's what happens when a father learns that the greatest legacy he can leave isn't his prejudices, but his capacity to grow, to change, and to choose love in the time he has left.